At one time, military officers from the various bases, they would go to the HQ for meetings or to go to other bases for meetings. And they would get there using their Land Rovers. When Dr. Goh discovered that per kilometer basis, it is more expensive to use a Land Rover than an ordinary car, he immediately forbid units to use the Land Rovers for urban driving. That's for the warfront, for rough terrain. It's built for it. As a result, it's not cost effective to use them. Immediate instruction, no waste.
The entrepreneur in Dr. Goh also decided to take a shot at producing military hardware at lower costs.
One day, I remember I was asked to bring a M16 rifle to his office and to strip it right in front of him. He then went through the various parts and to identify which were the parts that were made in Singapore and which were not, which were imported. He then asked me to segregate the parts that were not made in Singapore into high-value parts and low-value items, and asked why the high-value parts were not made in-house. Well, this was really typical of his economist training.
He always asked the question as to whether part of this, the full equipment could be produced in Singapore with the technologies transferred to us, of course. Because he believed that with the large number of good engineers in Singapore, we should be able to absorb these technologies and sort of build up our own capabilities in the production and maintenance of these weapon systems, and perhaps later even to do R&D activities.
The first defence company to get going was the Chartered Industries of Singapore. More than just being self-sufficient, Dr. Goh also felt the defence industry could help kickstart Singapore's industrialisation program. But there was to be no such thing as an easy ride for the defence companies.
You were never allowed to subsidise. Whatever we sold to MINDEF was international pricing. There was no subsidy. When I was in charge of CIS, the price of my bullets, he asked for international quotation and check. So we have a hard time.
A true visionary, Dr. Goh saw opportunities where others didn't. So the CIS also ended up housing the Singapore Mint, producing coins, using equipment and tool-making skills similar to those used for making weapons.
The enhanced technology level of our technical staff in Singapore in general, because many of these military equipment and weapon system consisted of very high technology, almost frontline technical know-how. And as long as they are available to us, I think his plan was we should acquire them and sort of jumpstart our high-tech industry.
It is a little-known fact today, but in the mid-1970s, the SAF operated a pineapple plantation and planted papayas too, on Dr. Goh's instructions. The pineapple plantation was at the Amoy Kui camp, home to the RSAF's 170 Squadron.
In a lot of our units, Air Force units, air bases, you can't grow trees. You got a lot of open spaces and you spend a lot of money cutting grass. So we felt that perhaps why won't we use that land and put it to economic use?
But although several thousand kilograms of pineapples were successfully harvested here each year, the pineapple project was eventually shelved after a few years. Those who had worked with Dr. Goh said he had another concern. The growing SAF needed the best brains it can get to organize and to maintain it. This led to the introduction of the SAF Overseas Scholarships in 1971. The first 5 SAF scholars included Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong, Bui Tak Hap and Lai Sik Kui. The award is second only to the President's Scholarship in prestige. But the ever-pragmatic Dr. Goh was mindful getting the best talents for the SAF didn't stop here.
One or two things had to be done. One was to open scholarship system to just not SAF scholars, but to others. To others doing local universities here. And we also monitor the people for fast track, not only SF scholars, but others, people who we send to Sandhurst, people who send to Dantun in Australia, you know, who actually come back with a degree. So they all go into this pool, this Wrangler pool, and they are monitored.
But Dr. Goh was dissatisfied about one thing, and that's the way instructions issued by MINDEF had no impact, simply because they were ignored. To test out his theory, he issued what has come to be known as the nonsense memo. This was a memo without any instructions, save for a passage from the Bible on Noah's Ark.
Units received it, the reaction was quite hilarious in the sense that people really did not know what to make out of it. I think some of them looked at it, pass it down to a subordinate and say, see what you can do about it. I think he was doing an experiment, I think, to find out whether, it's often said that military officers just take instructions and just do. They don't think.
While this episode showed Dr. Goh's sense of humour, it also proved his worst fears correct. Only 10 units responded to the memo. Some queried its objective. The rest mostly ignored it. At the end of the experiment, he wrote a paper, Noah's Ark Progresses Through the SAF, and circulated it to highlight how things needed to be changed. Dr. Goh was to serve twice as Defence Minister. By the time he left the ministry, he had built from scratch a fighting force of some 300,000 men. The SAF had gone from being resisted to being respected. After his success in the Finance and Defence Ministries, Dr. Goh earned himself the nickname Mr. Fix-It. And soon enough, there was another problem for him to fix. Dr. Goh had churned out a fighting army from the men that went into it. But his experience in defence told him the educational level of the recruits was way below par. He was compelled to devise the famous Hokkien platoon so the dialect-speaking recruits could get by on simple commands. To him, it was an example of how, despite massive expenditure, the education system was failing.
When I joined the Ministry of Education, the first thing which Dr. Goh says is that you have to go and meet this Hokkien platoon so that you will know what is the problem. So on a few occasions, I visited army camps and interacted with the soldiers there. And it was quite true. After whatever it is, 10 years of schooling, they came out of school, they were illiterate. So the question is, something must be wrong. And it cannot be that, and Dr. Goh felt that it cannot be the fault of the soldiers, so it must be the fault of the system. And this cannot be allowed to continue.
Goh's Daring Dozen was the nickname given to the team assembled by Dr. Goh to revamp the education system when he was appointed Education Minister in 1979. Most were systems engineers in their 20s with brilliant academic qualifications. Theirs was a high-profile assignment. They had to go to schools, talk to principals, teachers and those in the ministry to assess where to begin and what needed to be done. After 6 months, the report on the Ministry of Education, or the Goh Report, was released. Sweeping changes were recommended, not only in the way schools conducted their business, but in the philosophy of education. Streaming was introduced, a policy which recognized that different children are born with different abilities.